I've almost started putting that title onto my books. It's about a lifelong learner who cares, and something that my mother taught me. She passed away 2 years ago when she was 97, and she had said that as she was, to her 90s already, that she wasn't trying to add more years to her life. Enough years had been given to her already in her life. She wanted to add life to her years, and she said that I live when I learn. And if I stop being curious about what's happening around me and why it's happening, and curious about my own thoughts also, why they come, I've stopped learning, and therefore, she said, I've stopped living. And I want to live, and therefore, I want to learn. I want to be curious about why. Why is it so?
Hey all, Happy New Year! Wishing you and your near ones a wonderful 2021. Couldn't have asked for a better guest than Arun kicking off 2021. Arun Maira is one of those rare people who had held leadership positions in the private sector, not-for-profit, as well as public sector, bringing in a unique perspective on how everything can coexist to foster the growth of society and country. He's held multiple leadership roles at the Tatas, board member at Tata Motors, stints at Arthur D. Little, head of BCG India, member of Planning Commission, and currently chairman of Helpage International. At the heart of everything, he's a thought leader and an inspiration. Arun, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Srikanth. It's a pleasure to be with you.
It's a pleasure to hear you out. With over 5 decades of experience in this varied sectors, varied fields, from corporate to government to NFP, and now you're a much acclaimed author. How have you made the leap in each of these? What has been your lessons in these transitions, Arunji?
Mm-hmm. Srikanth, thank you for asking me about the turning points in my life. And as you pointed out, I've had the bounty given to me, the gift given to me by life of doing many different things and in different countries also. But I didn't necessarily choose to make changes every time. The changes came about by some basic direction that I had in my life, which then intersected with some changes in circumstances around me. And then I took another turn in my life. But there seems to have been a thread through all of it, which was a desire to learn about myself, about who am I and what am I seeking for in my life, as well as a great desire to understand things around me, how people around me think and they work, how the systems around me work, whereas in the government sector, you join to serve the country and the people. So I wasn't that. So why would I then end up in Tatas, which is a business organization? It's an interview with the Tatas where they, while recognizing that I wanted to join the government, explained that Tatas were also building the country and that they've been doing it a long time. In Jamshedji Tata's days, when he created a steel plant in India, when the British would not allow Indians to produce anything of any great depth and value, technology depth and value, because they took raw materials from India and took them to Britain and converted those raw materials into things that they sold back to us, like took our cotton and converted to cloth, and then we bought the cloth from England. So we had produced the cotton ourselves here in India. So the Tata directors told me that Mahatma Gandhi had said that while he was fighting for India's political freedom, Jamshedji Tata had been fighting for India's industrial freedom, economic freedom. And that impressed me that, the economy is also part of our lives. And to build industries which will employ people and enable people to learn, to do things which they don't know yet. I mean, industrialization is a process of people learning to do more complex things than they know when they join an industry. And countries grow into industries when the countries, people in the countries and enterprise in the countries start doing more complicated things. Like, producing a truck or a bus or a car is more difficult than stitching a garment. Yeah? So the garment industry is a good industry, it employs people, but it's not as complicated as producing a whole truck or a whole car. And they said Tata's has produced steel. Now we are into producing trucks and buses in India. So we are creating a new India, a more self-reliant India, an India in which lots of young people will be employed who will grow their own skills, yes, and become more self-confident and earn more thereby. So this was an attractive proposition to me for my desire to serve the country. So that's how I ended up in Tata's. I spent 25 years there, and I've written a book recently recollecting what I learned in Tata those 25 years, called The Learning Factory, and we can talk about what I learned in those days. But from Tata's, then I moved quite unexpectedly to the United States. Unexpectedly means that it was not a plan of my life. My plan of my life was to be in India and to continue to build
Mm-hmm.
myself in industry and with Tata's and to help Tata's to keep building more industries. But I ended up out of India altogether in the United States because of some family circumstances. I had to go there temporarily. It took a little longer when I got there. And so there I got chances to learn about things I couldn't have learned about in India because it was another country and it really interested me. It made me understand that the world is complex, that the world is composed of people with ideas, that there are institutions that people build with their ideas, and that's how the institutions of government in the US were quite different to the ones I'd experienced in India. The way industry ran in the US was different to the way I experienced industries in India, and the way families were together in the US was quite different to the way families were here. So institutions are different, and they're created by people's behaviors, their ideas, and their norms. So I became curious about people and institutions, and got very engaged in this whole field called organization learning. So it's not just about an individual, how individuals learn, and then teaching people, individuals, but how do organizations and institutions collectively learn to do things which they are not able to do beforehand, which I thought was very useful for me if I came back to India. Because when India was about building organizations with new capabilities, so how organizations learn and build better capabilities was really my quest. And then I came back to India when I was able to then apply what I had learned about how institutions learn, how industries learn, and maybe how countries learn back into India, but continue my learning about these matters when I came back in the year 2000. So that's principally then within India, of course, I was invited, fortunately, by the Prime Minister in 2009 to join the Planning Commission, where I got a great opportunity to see my own country, all sides of it, because in the Planning Commission, one sits beside the Prime Minister and has the breadth of the country around one, below one. It's like being in a helicopter and seeing the whole scene, all the different functions in the Planning Commission of industry, of health, of education, infrastructure, the financial sector. So it's all there. And a lot of NGOs would come and represent their views of what is necessary to be done in the country. So one got to listen to many more people than I was able to listen to when I was just working in industry before. And so, it was lovely to be listening and learning and listening and learning up in the Planning Commission. And then I left the Planning Commission when the government changed. We had to all, we resigned with the Prime Minister, appointed with the Prime Minister. And then I joined the civil services, not civil society sector, excuse me, the NGO sector mostly. And I've been learning with them around the world.
So that's where the stint with HelpAge.
Yes, and HelpAge, I had decided after the Planning Commission I didn't want to do any full-time work with a position in an organization, because that way then one is more in the doing mode and one is less in the ability to listen and reflect. In the doing mode, one also finds it harder to be able to criticize oneself or be criticized because you have to appear in charge. So if you don't take such a position, you can take feedback about what you've learned and whether you learned well, and also learn more easily. But HelpAge came to me and said to me that, look, they are looking for a new chairperson. And I made the excuse to them, which I had, that, I decided that after I was 65, I would not take any role, official position anywhere. I had taken the one with the Planning Commission because it was serving the nation. And who can refuse an invitation from the Prime Minister to say, will you serve the nation, the way Dr. Manmohan Singh put it to me. I mean, in college, I'd always wanted to do that. So 50 years later in life, if the Prime Minister says, come serve the nation, I said, well, I couldn't have joined the IS then. I didn't join the IS. Thank you, sir. So I came there. But that was over in 5 years. It's a term job. It was finished. And I said, well, I'm not going to take any position after 65. So my excuse was that, I've retired from doing any work which requires me to be in charge of anything. And they said to me, HelpAge International, look, we are about older people. We are helping the world to realize that the older people are not a burden. The older people are contributors and they should be valued and respected. And so you can't retire from that job. So
Hmm.
on our organization, you have to make an exception until you're 90 or whenever, you can be the chairperson of HelpAge International, considering what our message is. So that's the one thing that I have an official role in, which is chairperson of HelpAge International. And it doesn't take, it's not a full-time job. I don't do something every day there. It's not a 24 by 7 engagement, but it engages a lot of me in my thinking and my doing. And it is so central for me because as I'm working with other NGOs and civil society organizations, I'm learning the challenges of building a civil society organization which is doing good for people and not making any money or returns for itself. So it's been great learning. I'm continuing with it.
Super. I think we cannot encapsulate the 50 years plus of learning in this episode. We would need to definitely run lots of episodes. Talking about learning, you also kind of have taken another hat of being an author. You have authored close to about 9 books, the latest being The Learning Factory. Congratulations on your new book. Tell us a bit more about The Learning Factory, what made you to write it, and the essence of this particular book.
Yeah. Well, I was in the planning commission looking after the job of building industries in India, which is Dr. Manmohan Singh invited me for that. Because I said to him when he called me, I was surprised because I have never been in government. I'm not an economist. So I did say, sir, that I hope you haven't made a mistake. I'm Arun Maira and my name is spelled Maira. Perhaps your office was wanting someone else to come here, but it's me. He said, no, I know you. You worked in Tata's and I followed. And we need to do that now. We need to build industries in India which will produce things for us which we are not able to produce for ourselves yet. For our Atmanirbhar, let me say, self-reliance. It wasn't his term, which the present government is using. So you can see this challenge of India building itself, becoming more confident of itself and more self-reliant. It's an ongoing journey since Nehru's time into today. So he called me for that and said, "You have an experience in this, and we need to have you to guide the development of industry in the country, to create more jobs, to create more learning organizations in which young people will join, will serve, will earn, and will learn and increase their own competencies and the competencies of the institutions in which they work." So he invited me for that. So I learned a lot about my country then, about how industries were being shaped and why they were not growing as well as we needed them to grow. And I began to see that there were ideas that had come into the country in the 1990s and in the 2000s early from economics about how industries are parts of markets and human beings also are parts of labor markets. So this whole notion about markets in which there are prices for things and you buy and sell things and trade in things, that metaphor, that whole paradigm had begun to infect our country, that India had joined global markets and we must open up markets in the country. So these are economists' ideas, and Dr. Manmohan Singh, of course, is one of the best economists. So he said to me, we don't want another economist because we have many economists. We want to get outside the paradigm of thinking that economists could solve the problem and grow industries. So apply yourself. So I, looking through my lens of our people in the country learning, our institutions in the country learning, growing faster, began to see that China, for example, which is the country that we were beginning to envy and are still envying greatly in terms of what it has achieved in the same 30 years since its liberalization. than we have in during the time. I mean, it's grown its manufacturing sector about 10 times ours. It was in 1990. China had a similar size manufacturing sector as we had, was 10 times larger. In 1990, China used to produce less machine tools and capital goods, which are the mother industries, because they produce the tools with which then you can produce parts and so on. We had a comparable to China and better quality perhaps. For example, the trucks and buses we produced in India then, and we were exporting them. China wasn't able to do that. And the machine tools we produced in the country, including in my company, Tata's, were better than the Chinese ones that were available at the time. But today, the Chinese machine tools and capital goods industry is about 50 times our size. So when you come to importing, like in the telecom industry, which is very much in the air right now, we talk of UI and others. I mean, they are producing complex gear. Yeah, so we may have the BPO offices in India, right? And we will be producing things and on social media, maybe new platforms and applications. But the back end of telecommunications and the whole internet is being run on these very complicated hardware equipments. Yeah. And they are being produced in China to the world class to the extent that the US has to prevent their export out of China to go elsewhere. So, how did this happen? That in these 30 years, China learned much faster than we had learned. We have the same level of knowledge about industry in the 89, 90, and they were now so many rungs ahead of us in the depth of the industry and the scale of their industry. So, looking at the developments around us, the ideas around us, and the policies around us in India through the lens of do they stimulate rapid learning or not? Whereas people pointed out to us from the World Bank, who are always available to guide people in all governments and to us also, pointed out to us that China has been a faster learner than India. So we can keep looking for, China opened up land near the seashores so that people could put up big factories. That is what is visible. So we say, gave big pieces of land to foreign investors. Let's also open up big pieces of land on our shoreline and give it to foreign investors. Yes, but that is a very small part of the deeper change that has happened in China, with which it's built industries far away from those shore places also, and not just the garment industries and assembling of cell phone industries, which we keep saying were the large factories, is, as I said, the depth of the industries of China producing power generation equipment, producing telecommunication back-end equipment, electronics hardware, not merely software. These changes, how did this happen? So looking at ourselves, I found that one was we're barking up the wrong tree, as they say. If you bark up the tree of free trade and economics, which is based on markets and trade within markets, you will miss the insights that you would get if you looked at the systems around, whether they are countries or they are companies, through the lens of are they learning? Are they learning fast? Are they learning faster than any competition? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, everyone is learning somehow. Some are learning faster, some are learning slower. And those who learn faster catch up with those who are ahead of them. And then if they keep learning faster, they'll stay ahead of them. So like China, it was behind other countries in 1990, as we were too, but they have fought ahead and gone ahead of other countries so much faster. Before that, there was Japan, which after the war was producing cheap stuff, as people said, Japanese stuff. You may not remember it because you're younger. You used to buy Japanese stuff, but say, "Wo toot jata hai," it's sasta stuff. Like the reputation even Chinese goods had in the 1990s. So Japanese was like that in the 1960s. But then by the 1980s, giant Japanese cars, Japanese white goods, yeah, they were the world's benchmarks. And the US and the Germans had to compete against the quality of Japan. So they had learned also as a whole society. And many industries learned. The car industry learned, the white goods industry learned, the steel industry learned. Yeah, their trains are beautiful, always on time, clean. So the government systems were learning also in Japan very fast. And the China later, I'm saying, is the same story as we go on. So through this lens of learning, one begins to see what are the constraints on learning that the system imposes and that you impose on yourself also. So my book, The Learning Factory, is goes back, and this is the question you asked, is that what did I reflect when I was in the planning commission? Now, why did I write the book though? I wrote the book
Mhm.
because I was asked by a friend, Tarun Das, who was a chief mentor of CII and built up the Confederation of Indian Industry for 40 years, I think. So he knew the story of India's industrialization, as did I. I mean, he was in the association, the leader. I was in an industry, a manager and a leader. So he asked me on a trip to Singapore earlier this year only, in February. He said, where are you going? I said, Singapore. So was he. So we're talking about how Singapore has developed so fast. You know, it's one of the world's most developed countries. And it was in the 1960s when I joined Tata's. Singapore had nothing. There were marshes, right? Some fields, some sort of shops, but bazaars and some ports that ships used to come into because of its location. But look what Singapore is today. So I shared with him my stories and Tata's which were connected with the development of Singapore in the 1960s. Yes. As the Prime Minister of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew, asked GRD Tata, could Tata's help guide the building of industries within Singapore? Now imagine this story. There is Singapore today, which is being turned to by India also. Let's learn from you, because you are one of the most developed economies in the world. But in 1960, they were learning from us. So what happened to us? What happened to us is the question. We,
Mm.
if I would say, stopped building ourselves. We stopped building
Stop
ourselves.
learning.
We started to
Stop learning.
imitate. We stopped learning. Or we were learning. We always learned, but we weren't learning as fast as the Chinese were learning, like I pointed out, and many others.
Very interesting, very great perspective there. And I've had the opportunity to go through the book, so there are some fundamental and wonderful anecdotes there. So for all the listeners out there, you'll have the link for the book in the show notes. But one question, Arunji, that I have by virtue of reading the book is you're also responsible for creating Infosys of what it is today. So can you shed some light on that?
I am not responsible for Infosys, and neither is Tata's responsible for Infosys. But there is a story, and let me share that story. Right? It's a group of Sudha Murthy and Narayan Murthy who say that Tata's have helped to create Infosys. Of course, they say help too. They don't say created because it's Narayan Murthy and his police greatness that has created Infosys. So let's not take it away from them. But the story is that Tata's we were growing our industries. As we said, Learning Factory, which was in Pune, which is Sumant Mulgaonkar, he was at the time vice chairman of the Tata Group and vice chairman of the Tata Engineering and Locomotive Company, which is what Tata Motors used to be called, was decided that we needed to build a factory in India in which we would produce trucks and buses designed by Indians, because in Jamshedpur we had learned how to produce trucks and buses designed by Mercedes Benz of Germany. And they were great teachers, and we learned to produce the world's best types of buses and trucks. So now we're going to produce a factory built by Indians to produce things designed by Indians, and then करके दिखाना है कि हम भी कर सकते हैं. So in that, we had to get Indians to learn to do things which they'd never done before. Yes, they never designed a truck or a bus. We never designed the machines that go into a truck or a bus. We hadn't even designed the factory in Jamshedpur. The Germans helped us design the factory. Now we'd have to do all these things ourselves. Now who's going to do these things? Indians, but which Indians? Indians available around us had never done any of these things. So we'd have to all learn together to do something we'd never done before. And so it was in this thing that we had to find ambitious Indians, young Indians, who were, starting life. It's like going back. I wanted to build India when I left college. So, I mean, this time it's again people with the same spirit of building India, building new industries in India, going to the IITs, and we went to all the IITs, which fortunately were available to the country because of, I would say, Jawaharlal Nehru's farsightedness that unless you build the skills and knowledge of people, you cannot build anything with any depth thereafter. So his or the government of India's contributions to the growth of India since then have been very much in the institutions of learning, like the IITs particularly, which have helped build Infosys also, as you know. So anyway, we were in telco looking for the best Indians with an engineering background, so we could build in big Indian-built industry to build trucks and buses. We were finding mostly men in the IITs, obviously. There used to be hardly any women in the IITs. So the men were flying and they were being selected. And we were building systems for them to learn on the job while they were building things they never done before in Pune. And our advertisements didn't specifically say, or we thought they didn't specifically exclude women, because anyway, there weren't any women to hire, it seemed. A woman applied to the ad, and she was noticed then that she's very bright, her marks were very high, and that she should be considered. But then the people noticed that she was a woman. And so they said to her that we're very sorry, we cannot consider women for jobs here because it's on the factory floor and it means working with men and workers and, it's hard work and so on. So we cannot. But if you, since you're very good, we could offer you a job in an office. Yeah, and engineer, we do need people in design offices and we need people, in offices. We could do that. She insisted, no, I have learned to do manufacturing work and I want to be trained and I want to work on the factory floor. So then it was explained to her that, well, it's a matter of, no, it wasn't then explained to her. That was just said that we are sorry, we can't take you if you want to work only on the factory floor in manufacturing. So she dropped a letter to J.R.D. Tata. And he had this system that anybody in the country, mainly it was for Tata people, that if you felt there was something that was not going right in your company, you could write, and after you appealed and discussed with your own superiors, you could write to him and saying, sir, I would like you to consider this. But she, as an outsider, wrote to him and said that, how come when you say that you want to get the best Indians to build this telco thing here, and I'm being refused? What's wrong with me? I mean, I've done so well and stuff. The only thing wrong with me seems to be I'm a woman. JRD was quite intrigued, and so he told Suman Margaonkar, and he called me since I was in charge of the human resource building in the telco, that, Myra, why are you refusing this woman? So I repeated our logic that we want her, but we can't give her the jobs that we really have. All our jobs are mostly to do with the manufacturing jobs on the floor because, we can't have toilets and safety for women. So he said to me, he said, look, what does it cost you to build a few more toilets? And what is the talent that you're missing? This may be a very rare person and they're hard to find, Myra. So why don't you build a few toilets if you have to and allow women to join? So we changed our policies. We enabled women to join, and she did join. And as Narayan Murthy said that, he was starting Infosys, he had no money for his venture. So Sudha had to be doing earning in the family so she could support him while he was starting his venture. So that's how Narayan Murthy says and Sudha says that GRD helped them to start Infosys, right? So please, I'm not taking any credit away from Narayan Murthy or from Sudha.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Arunji. I think this itself is a great story of the leadership of JRD and the tenacity of Sudha Murthy. Thanks for that. So, checking along, you have been a big proponent of, amongst many things, nation building, organization building, all of those things, is also about the purpose of life. So, you have spoken on many occasions about the purpose of life. Maybe I will put you in a spot and ask you about this. How do you define purpose of life and how can one find it?
Actually, my granddaughter, she's now 9, but when she was 6 or 7, she asked her mother one day, mother was driving her in a car, and this little girl sitting behind her in the seat at the back said, Mom, are we real or are we a story? So asking about herself and about her mother, are we real or are we a story? And it makes you think that we are all part of some large story. We are all characters in some large story, right? How did we become characters in this story? Who made us characters in this story? Okay, and someone gave us birth, and so we appeared in some physical form as characters on the stage. But what is the role that we are supposed to play in this play? There is a big drama going on. So I'm being born onto the stage. I'm real. Am I? I can pinch myself and say, I feel it. But what is my role in this larger system around myself? I'm changing from a play to the system. Yeah, as they do say about the world, wo krida hai, but it's a game that God plays, right? So Krishna's Leela, it's there. So what is my purpose in this game? Now one can take a view that my purpose really is survival, right? Which is what many people define, that evolution is a process of the fittest survive. So I must grab as much as I can, food for myself, things for myself, space for my own house. And if I do that very well, I fulfilled my purpose in the bigger game. And then one says, but okay, all animals are doing that instinctively. They are also, part of the fight for their food, or they go foraging for their food. So am I just that? Am I just playing that animal like role as I live? Or is there another different and larger role that I could be playing? And as human beings, we ask ourselves this question, which means we are perhaps, like my granddaughter asking questions which I don't know whether animals ask themselves this question. मैं शेर का बच्चा बना हूँ, हाँ, कि am I part of some larger story? He's not. He's going to just jump out and say, I'm hungry now, no, let's get a deer, and live well. Their muscles get trained as they do it, and so they improve. But this question about what is the purpose of my existence, why did I come about, is something that human beings feel. So I ask myself this question, and I say it cannot be just making something for myself. Grabbing and being the most efficient or effective at making more for myself. Okay, getting more for myself. So we do find in business and otherwise that people who make a lot of money for themselves, we say, are very competent people and people to be admired. But what is it they have achieved? They have made a lot for themselves. What impact have they had on the world around them? Did, by their existence, they improve the world around them, or did they only make more for themselves? And so, this question about, by my existence, is the world improved or not? Have I purposefully, during my existence, helped the world to become better for others, not just for myself? So I find that this is the question that has been first lurking at the back of my mind as I've been going through life, is how can I help to make the world better for others? Yeah, for which I have to learn and become more effective and successful myself. But the purpose is not my own success. The purpose is making the world better for others, for everyone, to go down that path. And
Very profound, and it's for the larger good than for oneself. With that in mind, again, drawing on your experience, what would be some of those tips that you would recommend, share, that people listening to this talk can take and say that, okay, this is something I can consider doing so that I can also build purpose around my life?
yes, you have to ask yourself the question, what do you care about most deeply? What do you care about most deeply? And when you ask yourself this question, it could be that the answer that comes at what I care about most deeply is to be the most famous person, to be the greatest poet. And then ask yourself this question, by becoming the greatest poet, what need of myself and what need of society will I have satisfied? And if it turns out that your answer is only about, well, if I become the greatest poet, then I'll have more power, I'll have more wealth, I'll have more admiration. You're going down that selfish path again. But it's okay. I mean, we have to evolve. Then ask yourself, then I push myself to say, who else would be benefited by my becoming a great poet? And therefore, I start turning to asking the benefit of my existence and for my great talent for others. So I like to keep asking myself quite often, because I do find I will slip very easily, and I do, to say I'm doing something like talking to you, Shrikant, on this podcast and trying to do my best. That if this podcast is good, then Shrikant will share it with lots of people. And then lots of people will say, look, Arunji is a great guy. So I'm getting my own satisfaction about how great I am. So you remember what the Bhagavad Gita said? Krishna said, to Arjuna, you have a right to the work and not to the fruits thereof. I don't have a right to the fruits. The world has a right to the fruits of my work. Hmm? My purpose is to produce something for the world. And to judge whether I'm good for the world, I have to ask the world. did I do good for you? And the fact that they pay me or do admiration is not the right way to judge whether I'm doing good for the world. Yeah. Why? Because I very easily start measuring my success by my own wealth, by the number of people who follow me, and so on. Again, self-referential. How big I become. I have to slip to say no, no, at all times. Even if I have very few followers, do they feel that my being with them has helped them in some way? Was my
Beautiful.
being good for them?
Beautifully said, Tuji. Thank you so much. Again, coming back to the point, you have been an author of close to about 9 books, and there is a lot of thought leadership in that. If somebody were to come to you and say, Arunji, we would want to write a book on you, what do you think the title of that book should be or could be?
You know, I've almost started putting that title onto my books. It's about a lifelong learner who cares, a lifelong learner who cares. And something that my mother taught me. She passed away 2 years ago when she was 97, and she had said that as she was, to her 90s already, that she wasn't trying to add more years to her life. Enough years had been given to her already in her life. She wanted to add life to her years. And she said that I live when I learn. And if I stop being curious about what's happening around me and why it's happening, and curious about my own thoughts also, why they come, I've stopped learning. And therefore, she said, I've stopped living. And I want to live. And therefore, I want to learn. I want to be curious about why. Why is it so? And these why questions are the prodding questions for always learning. For always learning. So I want to share my insights into how I wasn't able to learn at sometimes. Like I said right now, when I start becoming self-referential, about just measuring the outcomes of learning. Did I get enough money? Did I get enough followers? I'm not focusing on the process of learning. Am I learning? It is like the Gita said, then it's the fruits that you're focusing on, but not on the actions. So just keep focusing on my actions of learning and learn from that.
Great. I think we have been sharing quite a lot of insights to us. If there is one inspire someone today message for all the listeners, what would that be?
Is these two things. One is see who other than yourself is benefited by your existence in this world. And there I would say that I'm very inspired by Mahatma Gandhi in his expression of Anantodaya, that if you want to think about any policy, as he said, or any action of your own, think of the poorest person that you can think of and imagine what benefit your action or your policy will have for that person. So by your existence also are the poorest people benefiting, by your policies also are the poorest people benefiting. Okay? So that judgment, keep asking yourself, what I'm doing, who is benefiting? Certainly shouldn't be me, but if it's other people like myself who already have a lot and they are benefiting, maybe I'm not stretching myself enough and not fulfilling the deepest human purpose for existence. So the second is Mahatma Gandhi himself, the inspiration that he had. So his book, autobiography, is called The Story of My Experiments with Truth. It is about, he was a lifelong learner. He was always, experimenting with his own ideas and finding, like we say, solutions, policy type solutions, and learning from them also. He was a great learner, learning about himself inside and learning about the world outside. So he was in action and learning. So it was not like learning or disappearing onto the top of a hilltop and for 6-7 years doing sannyas and learning about oneself in that thing. It was in life, learning in life. So those are the two messages. Keep learning and keep judging your actions by the benefit or the impact that they have on the poorest people around you.
Fantastic. Arunji, we had great time, great chatting up with you. Thank you so much for being on Inspire Someone today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Shrikant. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for listening into today's edition of Inspire Someone Today. It's been a privilege to bring in these conversations. If you like this episode and have any feedback or comments, do mail me at inspiresomeonetodaypodcast@gmail.com. Inspiring someone is like creating ripples around us.
If you like what to listen, feel free to share them and let's create ripples of inspiration. Do not forget to follow me on my Instagram handle @Inspire Someone Today podcast for all the latest updates. This is Srikanth, your host, signing off, and until next time, keep inspiring.